When I gifted my daughter Sarah a lakeside property for her wedding, I never imagined her fiancé would arrive with his parents, brother, and grandmother in tow, all claiming bedrooms before the ceremony even took place. They dismissed my daughter as little more than a live-in caretaker while declaring themselves the rightful owners of my gift. What these entitled opportunists failed to realize was that I had prepared legally binding ownership documents that would ultimately force their humiliating departure. Sometimes the most valuable gift isn't the property itself, but the clarity it brings about those who try to claim what they never earned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of my office as I signed the final document transferring ownership of the lakeside property to my daughter Sarah. The house had been a cherished family vacation home that I had recently renovated, transforming it into a permanent residence with modern amenities while preserving its historic charm. I had always intended for one of my children to inherit it someday, but Sarah's engagement to Nathan accelerated my timeline. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Eleanor?" my husband Marcus asked, his voice carrying that blend of support and concern I'd grown accustomed to during our 35 years of marriage. "It's a significant asset to sign away before they've even exchanged vows." I set down my pen and looked at the papers before me. "Sarah deserves a strong foundation to begin her marriage," I replied, my decision firm despite the nagging doubts I'd been suppressing. "And frankly, Nathan will never be able to provide this kind of security on his own." Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken assessment of our future son-in-law. Nathan Preston had always been unfailingly polite in our presence, attentive to Sarah, respectful to us, and seemingly devoted to making her happy. Yet something about him had never quite aligned with the persona he presented. His career as a freelance graphic designer had yielded inconsistent income at best. He drove a car Sarah had helped him finance, lived in an apartment she predominantly paid for, and had contributed virtually nothing to their wedding plans beyond opinions on what others should provide. Despite these red flags, Sarah had fallen deeply in love with him. Our intelligent, accomplished daughter, who had graduated with honors and built a promising career in architectural preservation, had somehow developed a blind spot where Nathan was concerned. When we expressed concerns, she defended him passionately, insisting that his artistic temperament and creative potential were worth supporting through this temporary financial imbalance. "She sees something in him that we don't," I admitted to Marcus as I organized the property documents into a leather portfolio. "And perhaps that's as it should be. But this house will be in her name alone, a security measure I hope she'll never need, but one I insist upon nonetheless." The following weekend, we planned a small gathering to surprise Sarah with the gift. I had invited only our immediate family, my son Christopher and his wife Melissa, Sarah and Nathan, and Marcus and myself. Nathan had asked if he could bring his parents to meet us properly before the wedding, and I had reluctantly agreed, assuming this occasion would provide a suitable opportunity for introductions. The lakeside property looked magnificent that spring day. The renovation had been completed just weeks before, with every detail meticulously executed according to my specifications. The original stone exterior had been carefully restored, while the interior combined classic architectural elements with contemporary comfort. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the tranquil lake, and a spacious deck wrapped around 3 sides of the house, offering panoramic views of the surrounding landscape. We arrived early to prepare for the surprise, arranging champagne and a small celebration lunch. I had just finished placing a bouquet of fresh lilies, Sarah's favorites, on the dining table when the sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of a vehicle. "They're early," Marcus noted, moving toward the entrance. Through the front windows, I was surprised to see not just one car, but a small caravan, Nathan's sedan followed by an aging SUV and a compact hatchback. As the vehicles parked, Doors opened to reveal not just Nathan and Sarah, but what appeared to be his entire extended family. Nathan emerged from his car first, followed by Sarah, whose expression conveyed a mixture of surprise and discomfort that immediately set my maternal instincts on alert. From the SUV emerged an older couple, the man barrel-chested with a ruddy complexion, the woman thin and sharp-featured with assessing eyes that darted across the property with undisguised calculation. Nathan's parents, I presumed. The hatchback yielded a younger man who bore a striking resemblance to Nathan, alongside a pregnant woman and an elderly lady who needed assistance navigating the gravel driveway. Before Marcus or I could even step outside to greet them, Nathan's mother marched directly toward the front door, brushing past us with barely a nod of acknowledgement. "So this is the famous lake house," she announced, her voice carrying an edge that immediately set my teeth on edge. Nathan said it was nice, but I wasn't expecting something this fancy. Probably costs a fortune to heat in the winter. She proceeded into the living room without waiting for invitation, her critical gaze sweeping across the furnishings as if conducting an inventory. Nathan's father followed close behind, running his hand along the custom woodwork with a scrutiny that felt invasive rather than appreciative. "Solid craftsmanship," he commented, not to us but to his son who had entered behind them. "Not like that prefab garbage they're building nowadays. This place must be worth what? $1 million, $1.5 million? I exchanged a glance with Marcus, whose tight expression mirrored my own discomfort with their immediate focus on monetary value rather than the occasion itself. Sarah entered last, her eyes finding mine with an apologetic look that broke my heart. She had clearly not anticipated this invasion any more than we had. "Mom, Dad," she began, "I thought we were just meeting you for lunch. I didn't realize—" Her sentence trailed off as Nathan's brother and his pregnant wife entered, followed by the elderly woman I now assumed was their grandmother. "Grams needed to get out of the house," Nathan's brother explained without preamble or introduction. "And when Nate mentioned a lake house, well, it seemed like a nice opportunity for a family outing." The elderly woman nodded, already making her way toward one of the plush armchairs by the fireplace. "My doctor says fresh air is important at my age. The view here is much better than my retirement community. That place feels like a prison." Within minutes, the peaceful home I had carefully prepared for an intimate family celebration had been transformed into what felt like a bustling open house. Nathan's family members dispersed throughout the space, opening doors, examining fixtures, and offering unsolicited assessments of everything from the kitchen appliances to the thickness of the carpet. "Nathan!" his mother called out from the master bedroom. "Come look at this bathroom. It's bigger than our entire guest room." I stood frozen in the entryway, watching as strangers inspected every inch of the property I had intended to present to my daughter as a symbol of my love and support. Sarah's discomfort was palpable as she hovered uncertainly between family groups, attempting to mediate a situation rapidly spinning beyond her control. "I'm so sorry," she whispered when she made her way back to my side. "Nathan told them we were meeting you for lunch, but he never mentioned they'd all be coming. I had no idea." Before I could respond, Nathan's father emerged from the hallway, a satisfied expression on his face. "The room at the east end would be perfect for Grams," he announced to no one in particular. "Good morning light, easy access to the bathroom, and away from the noise of the main living area." I blinked in confusion, unsure what he meant by this assessment. Sarah looked equally perplexed. "Perfect for what?" she asked. Nathan approached, placing an arm around her shoulders in what appeared to be a gesture of affection, but which I now recognized as preemptive damage control. "Well, sweetheart," he began, his tone carrying that placating quality I'd occasionally noted when he was attempting to manage her reactions. "We were thinking, since this place has so much space, it might make sense for Grams to stay here after the wedding. Her lease at Sunny Pines is up next month, and the rates are increasing again." The casual presumption that a property not yet gifted for a wedding not yet occurred would naturally accommodate his extended family, rendered me momentarily speechless. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to incredulity. "Nathan, we haven't even discussed." She was interrupted by his mother, who had emerged from the master bedroom with an armful of decorative pillows I had personally selected. "These will have to go," she declared, dropping them unceremoniously onto a side table. "Too fussy, and they take up half the bed. Nathan, your father and I will need space for our own things when we move in." And in that moment, watching my daughter's face as the full implications of that statement registered, I realized that the gift I was about to give would provide something far more valuable than shelter or security. It would reveal, with perfect clarity, exactly what kind of family she was preparing to join. "When we move in," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper as I processed the audacity of the statement. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, all casual conversation halting, as my words hung in the air. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "Mom, Of course," Nathan's mother, Diane, continued as if my question had been one of clarification rather than disbelief. "Nathan mentioned this place has 5 bedrooms. That's more than enough space for all of us." She gestured broadly to encompass the assembled family members. "Sarah can't possibly need all this space for herself." Marcus stepped forward, his calm demeanor belying the tension I could see in his shoulders. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We haven't yet discussed any living arrangements beyond Sarah and Nathan." Nathan's father, Richard, let out a dismissive laugh. "Well, that seems short-sighted. Family should stick together, especially when there's plenty of room." He clapped Nathan on the shoulder with unnecessary force. "Our boy needs his support system close by. Isn't that right, son?" Nathan nodded, avoiding eye contact with anyone, in particular. "It would help us save money while we get established." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The pregnant woman, Nathan's sister-in-law Jessica, as I would later learn, had wandered into the kitchen and was opening cabinets and drawers with the familiarity of someone examining her own future property. "The storage space in here is amazing. Our apartment barely has enough room for a week's worth of groceries." Her husband, Nathan's brother Tyler, joined her at the refrigerator. "And brand new appliances. This would be perfect for when the baby comes." I exchanged a glance with Marcus, whose expression had hardened into something I rarely saw outside of his boardroom negotiations. He gave me a subtle nod. He would follow my lead on how to handle this situation. "I think," I said. "Carefully, we should clarify the purpose of today's gathering. We invited you here to celebrate with Sarah, not to discuss multi-generational living arrangements." Diane waved her hand dismissively. "Well, of course we're here to celebrate, but it's only practical to discuss the logistics while we're all together. For instance," she continued, turning to Sarah, "the master bedroom closet will need to be divided. Richard and I will take the walk-in section, and you two can use the smaller closet in the hallway for your things." Sarah's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and growing anger. "Diane, I think you've misunderstood. Nathan and I haven't decided to live here yet, let alone with extended family." "Not decided?" Richard scoffed. "Why wouldn't you?" "Live here? It's a beautiful property that costs you nothing. And family living is economical. We can share expenses, childcare, household duties." He looked directly at my daughter. "Your mother-in-law can teach you how to properly manage a household this size. It's quite different from maintaining an apartment." The condescension in his tone ignited something in Sarah I hadn't seen since she was a teenager fighting for independence. She straightened her spine and leveled a cool stare at Richard. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own household, whatever size it happens to be." Now, Diane interjected with a patronizing smile. "There's no need to get defensive. We're only trying to help. After all, you work such long hours at that preservation office. You'll need support running things here, especially once you start having children. I raised 3 boys while maintaining a perfect home. I can show you how it's done." Before Sarah could respond, Nathan's grandmother called out from where she had settled into an armchair by the fireplace. "Is this room too drafty in the winter? My arthritis acts up something terrible with the slightest chill." Tyler immediately moved to her side. "Don't worry, Grams. We can have a supplemental heating system installed in your room." He looked expectantly at Marcus. "The east bedroom would be perfect for her, don't you think? Away from the noise, but close to a bathroom." The casual presumption that they would not only move in but begin making structural modifications to the property left me momentarily speechless. I looked at Sarah, whose expression had shifted from embarrassment to something harder, a clarity forming behind her eyes. "There seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding happening here," she said, her voice steady despite the visible tension in her shoulders. "This visit was meant to be an introduction between our families, not a planning session for communal living." "Well, of course," Diane replied with a tight smile. "But since we're all here, it makes sense to discuss these things. For instance, the furniture in this place is lovely, but not practical for a household our size. We'll need to replace some pieces with more functional options." "Replace the furniture?" I echoed, unable to hide my incredulity. The antique writing desk in the corner had been my grandmother's. The dining table had been custom-made by a local craftsman. Every piece had been chosen with care and consideration. "Nothing personal," Richard assured me with a patronizing smile. "But these showpieces aren't made for everyday family living. We need sturdier options, especially with a baby on the way and Grams needing special accommodations." Nathan had remained conspicuously quiet throughout this exchange, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot, but offering no defense of Sarah or clarification of the situation. "Nathan," Sarah said, turning to her fiancé with an intensity that seemed to finally capture his attention, "did you tell your family we would all be living here together?" He hesitated, glancing between his parents and Sarah before replying. "I mentioned your parents were helping us with housing after the wedding. It seemed logical that—" "Logical?" Sarah interrupted, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "It seemed logical that 6 people would move into a house that hasn't even been offered to us yet, without any discussion." "Now, Sarah," Nathan said in the placating tone I'd grown to recognize, "you're overreacting. We're just exploring options that benefit everyone. Your parents have this beautiful property that's clearly too large for just the 2 of us. My family needs housing solutions. It makes perfect sense to combine resources." "Combine resources?" Sarah repeated, her eyebrows rising. "What resources exactly is your family contributing to this arrangement?" An uncomfortable silence fell, as the question hung in the air. Richard cleared his throat. "Well, we'd handle maintenance, of course. I'm quite handy around the house. And Diane would oversee the cooking and cleaning. She runs a tight ship. Tyler's good with technology. He could upgrade all the systems. Jessica could handle the gardening once the baby's old enough." He gestured toward the elderly woman. "And Grams brings wisdom and experience. Every household needs an elder's perspective." Marcus, who had been observing with measured silence, finally spoke. "That's a creative interpretation of resource contribution, but it doesn't address the fundamental issue here. This property was not offered as a communal living space for extended family." "Well, that's rather selfish, isn't it?" Diane replied, her tone sharpening. "Keeping all this space for just 2 people when family members are struggling with housing costs? I thought you were supposed to be generous people." I felt my patience evaporating. Generosity is freely given, not demanded or presumed. And it certainly doesn't include strangers rearranging my furniture and claiming bedrooms without so much as a proper introduction. "Strangers?" Diane gasped, placing a hand dramatically over her heart. "We're about to be family. Sarah, are you going to let your mother speak about us this way?" All eyes turned to my daughter, who stood in the center of the room, caught between familial loyalty and the increasing absurdity of the situation. I could see the internal struggle playing across her face, her natural inclination to keep peace, battling against the clear boundary violations occurring before her eyes. "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that we need to take a step back. This house belongs to my parents. No decisions about who lives here or how it's arranged can be made without their explicit permission." "But Nathan said," Tyler began. "Nathan was mistaken," Sarah cut in, casting a pointed look at her fiancé. "And I think we've imposed on my parents' hospitality enough for one day." Nathan frowned, clearly displeased with this turn of events. "Sarah, don't be rude. My family came all this way to see the property." "To see it, yes. Not to partition it into family living quarters," she replied, her patience visibly wearing thin. Richard stepped forward, his expression darkening. "Now, listen here, young lady. In our family, we make decisions together. If you're marrying our son, you need to understand that we come as a package deal. Nathan has obligations to his family that don't disappear just because you put a ring on his finger." "Obligations?" Sarah echoed, her gaze shifting to Nathan. "What obligations would require your entire family to move into our home without discussion?" Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "It's not like that. It's just, my parents have always expected that I'd help provide for the family once I got established. And Tyler and Jessica need help with the baby coming. And Grams can't afford the retirement community anymore." He reached for Sarah's hand. "It's what families do for each other. I thought you'd understand." I watched as understanding dawned in my daughter's eyes, not just about the current situation, but about the expectations that would shape her future if she proceeded with this marriage. The realization was painful to witness, but necessary. "I understand family support," Sarah said quietly. "What I don't understand is why you didn't discuss any of this with me before inviting everyone to stake claims on a property that isn't even ours." "Because you would have said no," Diane interjected. "Nathan knows how you are, always insisting on independence and privacy. Those are luxuries real families can't afford. Sometimes you need to sacrifice personal preferences for the greater good." "The greater good being your comfort at my expense?" Sarah asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the escalating tension. Richard's face flushed with anger. "That's enough of your attitude. Nathan, are you going to let her speak to your mother this way?" All eyes turned to Nathan, who looked trapped between conflicting loyalties. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he sighed and placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sweetheart, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Let's just agree that we'll live here after the wedding, and we can work out the details of who gets which room later." In that moment, I saw something shift in my daughter's expression. A final illusion falling away as she recognized not just the situation before her, but the partner who had failed to stand beside her in a moment of clear boundary violation. "No, Nathan," she said quietly. "We won't be working out those details later, because there is no we making this decision. This property belongs to my parents, and they alone will determine its future." The tension in the lakeside property had reached an unmistakable crescendo. Marcus and I exchanged glances, a silent communication honed through decades of partnership. He gave me a subtle nod, confirming what I already knew. It was time to clarify matters once and for all. "I believe," I said, stepping forward with deliberate calm, "that we should address the fundamental misunderstanding that has occurred here." I turned to face Nathan's family collectively. This gathering was arranged to present Sarah with a gift, the deed to this property, which Marcus and I intended to transfer solely into her name. Diane's eyes widened, calculations visibly running behind them. "The deed?" You mean you're giving her full ownership? That was our intention, I confirmed. A wedding gift to provide her with security and a foundation for her future. Richard cleared his throat, his tone shifting to something faux conciliatory. Well, that's extraordinarily generous. And of course, once Sarah and Nathan are married, they'll share ownership. That's how marriage works. What's hers becomes his, and by extension, benefits the entire family. That is not, in fact, how modern marriage necessarily works, Marcus interjected, his lawyer's precision evident in every word. And it certainly isn't how this gift was intended to function. Nathan stepped forward, placing his arm around Sarah's shoulders in what appeared protective but felt possessive. What my father means is that we're deeply grateful for your generosity. This property will be the perfect foundation for our extended family's future. Sarah stiffened beneath his touch. Nathan, this conversation needs to stop. You haven't consulted me about any of these arrangements. You've made assumptions and promises without my knowledge or consent. Promises? I asked, my attention sharpening. What promises exactly have been made regarding this property? A moment of uncomfortable silence stretched between us before Tyler spoke up. Nathan said we could move in after the wedding. He said the East Wing would accommodate Grams, Jessica and me, and the baby, while his parents would take the master suite. He gestured vaguely toward Sarah. You two would take the guest room until you have kids, then you'd move to the larger bedroom on the second floor. I felt a cold fury building within me, not directed at Tyler, who was merely repeating what he'd been told, but at the presumption that had led to this situation. Sarah's expression reflected a similar realization, her cheeks flushing with a combination of embarrassment and anger. And when exactly was this arrangement discussed with Sarah? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. I was waiting for the right moment. These things need to be approached delicately. Delicately, Sarah repeated, stepping away from his touch. You mean you were waiting until the deed was signed over, and it would be too difficult for me to object without causing a family crisis? That's unfair, Nathan protested, though his eyes darted nervously between his parents and his fiancée. I was trying to solve multiple problems at once. Your parents have this enormous house they barely use. My family needs affordable housing. It's an elegant solution that benefits everyone. Except it was never your solution to propose, Marcus pointed out. This property belongs to us, and our intention was to gift it to Sarah, not to provide communal housing for an extended family we barely know. Diane bristled visibly. Well, I never. Is that how you speak about your future in-laws, as people you barely know? No wonder Sarah has such poor understanding of family obligation. Family obligation? I echoed, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Is that what you call moving into someone else's property without invitation and rearranging their furniture? Mom? Sarah cautioned quietly, though I could see the appreciation in her eyes. No, Sarah, I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on Diane. This needs to be addressed directly. Your future in-laws have made assumptions about our property and your future that demonstrate a fundamental lack of respect for boundaries. That isn't family obligation, it's entitlement. Richard stepped forward, his face reddening. Entitlement. We've raised our son to understand that family comes first. Always. Whatever resources are available get shared for the common good. That's not entitlement, that's community. Community requires mutual consent, Marcus observed. What you're describing is appropriation. Nathan's grandmother, who had remained relatively quiet throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up from her armchair. In my day, young couples lived with their elders. It was expected. This modern obsession with privacy and independence, it's selfish. That's what it is. With all due respect, Sarah replied, her voice firm despite her visible discomfort. Expectations from your day aren't automatically applicable to my marriage. Nathan and I need to establish our own household according to our mutual agreement, not based on arrangements he made behind my back." "Behind your back?" Nathan protested. "I was trying to help everyone. Your parents get to see their generosity benefit multiple people. My family gets stable housing. We save money while building our future. It's win-win-win." Sarah turned to face him fully, something resolute settling in her expression. "What you call helping everyone, I call making commitments on my behalf, without my knowledge or consent. That's not partnership, Nathan. That's not how I want to begin our marriage." "So, you'd leave my parents struggling with their mortgage? Let Tyler and Jessica raise their baby in that tiny apartment? Force Grams into a state facility because you want this enormous house all to yourself?" Nathan's voice rose with each question, a manipulative edge becoming increasingly apparent. "Is that the kind of person you are?" I watched my daughter absorb these accusations, saw the momentary doubt flicker across her face before her spine straightened with newfound certainty. "The kind of person I am," she replied evenly, "is someone who expects honesty and respect from her partner. Someone who believes major life decisions should be made together, not presented as fait accompli. Someone who won't be emotionally blackmailed into housing arrangements she never agreed to." "Emotional blackmail?" Diane gasped. "How dare you? Nathan is trying to take care of his family. That's what real men do." "Real men," Marcus interjected, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had served him well throughout his career, "don't make promises regarding assets they don't own, nor do they volunteer their partners for caretaking roles without consultation." Nathan's face flushed with anger. "This isn't about you," he snapped at Marcus. "This is between Sarah and me." "Except it's not," Sarah countered. "You've made it about your entire family by promising them access to a property that isn't yours to give." Tyler, who had been watching the exchange with growing discomfort, finally spoke up. "Look, maybe we should all calm down. If Sarah's not on board with the arrangement, we can't force it." He glanced apologetically at his brother. "Nate, you should have been straight with us about whether this was a done deal." "It would have been," Nathan muttered, "if everyone had just played along instead of making a scene." The naked calculation in that statement hung in the air between us. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that the gift I had planned to give Sarah would have become something very different from what I intended. Not a foundation for her security, but leverage used against her by a partner who prioritized his family's interests above her autonomy. Sarah must have reached a similar conclusion, because something shifted in her demeanor. A subtle but unmistakable withdrawal, as if she were seeing Nathan clearly for the first time. "Played along," she repeated softly. "That's what you expected me to do? Just accept that you'd committed me to housing and caring for your entire family without even discussing it with me first?" Nathan's expression turned defensive. "You're making this into something it's not. Family helps family, that's all. Once we're married, your priorities will need to shift. You can't keep acting like some independent single woman when you're part of a larger unit." "A unit where decisions are made for me rather than with me?" Sarah asked. "Sometimes yes," Richard interjected. "In a family, individual preferences take a back seat to collective needs. That's the reality of commitment." Sarah looked between Nathan and his parents, then turned to me with sudden clarity in her eyes. "Mom, Dad, I think I need some time to reconsider some things." The implication was unmistakable, and Nathan reacted immediately. "Reconsider what exactly?" His tone held an edge I hadn't heard before, something demanding and slightly threatening. "The wedding, for starters," Sarah replied calmly. "I won't enter a marriage where major decisions about my life are made without my input." "You can't be serious," Nathan scoffed, though I detected genuine alarm beneath his dismissive tone. You're going to throw away our entire relationship over a housing disagreement? This isn't about housing, Sarah corrected him. It's about respect, honesty, and partnership. Qualities I'm no longer confident exist between us. Diane stepped forward, her expression hardening. Now you listen here, young lady. Nathan has bent over backward, accommodating your career ambitions, your independent streak, your insistence on doing things your way. The least you could do is show some flexibility when it comes to his family's needs. The least I could do, Sarah echoed, a new steadiness in her voice, is expect basic honesty from my future husband. The least I could do is require consultation on major life decisions. The least I could do is insist on being treated as a full partner rather than an accessory to plans made without my knowledge. You're being dramatic, Nathan said, his tone shifting to something placating. We can work this out. Maybe not. Everyone moves in right away. We can phase it in gradually, give you time to adjust. I don't need time to adjust to a decision I never made, Sarah interrupted. She slipped the engagement ring from her finger and held it out to him. What I need is time to reconsider whether this relationship is one I want to continue. The room fell silent as Nathan stared at the ring in her outstretched palm. His expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, anger, and calculation, before settling into something resembling contrition. Sarah, please, he said, his voice softening. You're overreacting. Let's not make hasty decisions we'll regret. The hasty decision, she replied steadily, was agreeing to marry someone who would make commitments on my behalf without my knowledge. Someone who views my autonomy as negotiable. Someone who expected me to play along rather than be treated as an equal partner. Richard stepped forward, his patience visibly exhausted. This is ridiculous. Nathan, take the car keys. We're leaving. She'll calm down eventually and realize what she's throwing away. Nathan hesitated, looking between his father and Sarah with uncertainty. If you leave now, Sarah said quietly, you're confirming everything I've just realized about our relationship. That when faced with difficult conversations, you defer to your family's expectations rather than engaging with me as a partner. For a moment, I thought he might choose differently, might recognize the crossroads before him and opt for the path that honored Sarah's concerns. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and reached for the keys his father held out. Call me. When you're ready to be reasonable, he said to Sarah, his tone carrying a dismissiveness that seemed to finalize her decision. As Nathan's family gathered their belongings and filed toward the door, I moved to stand beside my daughter. Whatever pain or doubt she might be feeling, I wanted her to know she wasn't standing alone. After Nathan and his family departed, the lakeside property settled into an uneasy quiet. Sarah stood by the window, watching their caravan of vehicles recede down the driveway, her posture rigid with emotion. The engagement ring lay abandoned on the coffee table, catching the afternoon light in a way that seemed almost accusatory. Sarah, I said gently, approaching my daughter with measured steps. Are you all right? She turned to face me, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but her expression was one of clarity rather than devastation. I'm not sure all right is the right word, she admitted, but I think I just avoided making the biggest mistake of my life. Marcus moved to join us, placing a supportive hand on Sarah's shoulder. You showed remarkable strength in there. Standing up for yourself in the face of that kind of manipulation isn't easy. Sarah took a deep breath, composing herself. I keep thinking about how differently today might have gone if we hadn't had this preview of what was to come. She gestured around at the house. If we'd gotten married first, if the deed had already been transferred, if I'd found myself legally bound both to Nathan and to this property, the implications hung in the air between us. How much harder it would have been for her to establish boundaries or extract herself from a situation where her autonomy had been systematically undermined. I believe, I said carefully, that some gifts reveal truths far more valuable than their material worth. This house was intended to provide you with security, but perhaps its greatest gift was the clarity it offered before permanent commitments were made. Sarah nodded, blinking back. Tears. I just don't understand how I could have been so blind. Looking back, the signs were all there. The way he deferred to his parents on major decisions, how he always framed my independence as something that needed to be worked around, his vague references to future family arrangements that he never quite explained. Love creates its own filter sometimes, Marcus observed. We see what we hope to see, particularly when someone is skilled at presenting different faces in different contexts. And Nathan was certainly skilled at that, Sarah acknowledged. With my friends, he was the supportive partner who encouraged my career. With you, he was the respectful future son-in-law. But with his family. She shook her head. With them, he became someone else entirely, someone who viewed me primarily as an asset to be leveraged for their collective benefit. I guided Sarah to the couch, and the three of us sat together in the living room that had, less than an hour ago, been the stage for such a revealing confrontation. The leather portfolio containing the property deed, the gift we hadn't had the opportunity to present formally, rested on the side table where I'd placed it earlier. I never told you this, I began, but I had my own doubts about this transfer. Not because I didn't want you to have the property, I clarified quickly, but because I was concerned about the timing. Giving such a significant asset before your marriage felt protective in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Like you sensed something wasn't right? Sarah asked. I nodded. Perhaps, though I rationalized it as standard parental caution, which is why I insisted on some specific legal provisions in the deed transfer. Sarah's brow furrowed with interest. What kind of provisions? Marcus smiled slightly, his legal background evident in his appreciation for this detail. Your mother was quite specific about the terms. The property transfers solely to you, with no automatic rights extending to a spouse without an additional legal instrument. It includes a non-transferability clause that prevents the property from being used as collateral without both your signature and ours for the first 5 years of ownership. Essentially, I explained, we structured it to ensure that this property remained firmly under your control, regardless of your marital status or any pressure that might come from external parties. You anticipated something like this, Sarah said, her tone reflecting dawning understanding. Not specifically, I admitted. But I've seen enough in my lifetime to know that security can become vulnerability when the wrong people gain influence over it. I wanted this gift to empower you, not become leverage that could be used against you. Sarah reached for the portfolio, her hand steady despite the emotional turbulence of the afternoon. May I see it? I nodded, watching as she opened the leather cover and began reading through the legal documents inside. Her background in architectural preservation had given her enough experience with property matters to understand the significance of the clauses Marcus had highlighted. This is, she began, then paused to collect her thoughts. This would have been a point of serious contention if Nathan and I had married. He and his family would never have accepted these restrictions. Which tells you everything you need to know about their intentions, Marcus observed. Sarah continued reading, her expression growing more resolved with each page. The language here is unambiguous. No co-ownership without explicit written amendment. No right for a spouse to make modifications without owner consent. No ability to use the property as financial collateral without original grantor approval. She looked up, a mix of gratitude and newfound clarity in her eyes. You really did think of everything. Not everything, I said softly. I couldn't have anticipated the scene we just witnessed, but I did want to ensure that whatever happened, this gift remained what it was intended to be. A foundation for your security and independence, not a resource to be commandeered by others. Sarah closed the portfolio and sat in thoughtful silence for a moment. You know what's strange? Part of me feels I should be devastated right now. I just ended my engagement and confronted the reality that the man I planned to marry viewed me, primarily as a means to secure housing for his family. Yet instead, I feel liberated. Like I've narrowly avoided being trapped in a situation that would have slowly eroded my autonomy. That's because you're stronger than you realize, I told her. Strong enough to recognize when something isn't right, even when walking away would be the more difficult choice. Marcus nodded in agreement. Some people might have ignored those red flags, convinced themselves that the situation would improve after marriage, or that compromise meant accepting fundamental disrespect. You didn't. Sarah's phone began buzzing insistently, Nathan calling, no doubt with a carefully constructed apology designed to regain control of the situation. She glanced at the screen, then deliberately placed the phone face down on the table. He'll try to convince me I overreacted, she said. That I'm being selfish for not considering his family's needs. That my insistence on consultation and consent is unreasonable when balanced against their financial circumstances. And? What will you tell him? I asked, already knowing the answer but wanting her to articulate it for herself. That partnership requires mutual respect. That marriage isn't a vehicle for solving his family's housing problems. That my boundaries aren't negotiable, especially when it comes to major life decisions. She took a deep breath. And that I deserve someone who sees me as an equal partner, not a convenient solution to family obligations. The remainder of the afternoon passed in quiet conversation. We didn't formally present the deed. That felt inappropriate given the circumstances, but we discussed the property's future. Sarah wasn't ready to make decisions about whether she would live there herself or perhaps lease it until she determined her next steps. What mattered was that those decisions would be hers alone to make, based on her own priorities rather than external pressures or manipulative expectations. As evening approached, Sarah prepared to return to her apartment in the city. The engagement ring remained on the coffee table, a deliberate statement that her decision was final, not a temporary emotional reaction to be reconsidered after cooling down. Would you like me to handle returning the ring? Marcus offered as Sarah gathered her things. She considered this for a moment, then shook her head. No, I need to do it myself, with clear communication about why our engagement is ending. No ambiguity that might leave room for negotiation or manipulation. I felt a surge of pride at her resolution. You know we support whatever decision you make. I do know that, she replied, embracing me. And I'm grateful, not just for the property, though that's incredibly generous, but for creating the circumstances that revealed the truth before it was too late. As we walked her to her car, Sarah paused to look back at the lakeside property. The gift that had inadvertently exposed a fundamental incompatibility in her relationship before legal and emotional entanglements had made separation far more complicated. I was thinking, she said, about what you said earlier, about gifts sometimes revealing truths more valuable than their material worth. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. The real gift today wasn't the house, she said thoughtfully. It was the clarity that came with it, the opportunity to see Nathan's true priorities when he thought he had leverage, the chance to recognize that his family's expectations would always take precedence over our partnership. She smiled, a genuine expression despite the day's emotional turmoil. Some people might view today as a loss, a relationship ended, plans derailed. But I see it as a narrow escape from a future where my needs and autonomy would have been systematically subordinated to others' demands. As Sarah drove away, Marcus and I remained on the porch, watching until her car disappeared around the bend in the road. She'll be all right, won't she? I asked, though it wasn't really a question. "More than all right," he confirmed. "She's just demonstrated remarkable clarity and courage. Those qualities will serve her far better than a relationship built on manipulation and uneven power dynamics." We returned inside to the quiet house that had, just hours earlier, been the stage for such a revealing confrontation. The property documents remained on the side table, papers that would have transferred ownership of a valuable asset but had, instead, facilitated something far more precious: my daughter's recognition of her own worth and her refusal to compromise it for the illusion of partnership. I picked up the portfolio, running my fingers over the embossed leather. "You know, when I planned this gift, I imagined it would provide Sarah with security and stability as she began her married life. I never anticipated it would protect her in quite this way." Marcus smiled, placing his arm around my shoulders. "The best protections often work in unexpected ways. Your instinct to maintain her independent ownership probably saved her from years of progressive entrapment. The property would still be Sarah's. We would proceed with the transfer as planned, once the emotional dust had settled. But now it would truly be hers alone, a foundation for whatever future she chose to build, with her autonomy intact and her eyes wide open." The document that had been intended as a wedding gift had instead become something far more valuable, the catalyst for her liberation from a relationship that would have slowly diminished her. Sometimes, I reflected, the most profound gifts aren't the ones we plan, but the revelations that emerge when our plans encounter reality. 3 days after the confrontation at the lake house, the emotional storm I had anticipated arrived with predictable fury. Sarah had returned to her apartment in the city, firmly maintaining her decision to end the engagement despite Nathan's increasingly desperate attempts to re-establish contact. She had blocked his number after the 20th call, removed herself from social media temporarily, and informed mutual friends that she needed space to process this significant life change. I was reviewing architectural plans for a commercial restoration project in my home office when my phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and I answered immediately, concerned by the call during her workday. "Mom," her voice was steady, but tense. "Nathan's family is here at my office building." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean, here?" "Downstairs in the lobby. All of them. His parents, his brother, even his grandmother in a wheelchair. They're demanding to speak with me, causing a scene. Security is trying to manage the situation, but my colleagues are starting to notice." I rose from my desk, already reaching for my car keys. "Have they threatened you?" "Not explicitly," Sarah replied, her professional composure impressive, given the circumstances. "But Diane, Nathan's mother, is telling everyone who will listen that I've stolen property intended for the family, and that I'm vindictively punishing Nathan by withholding his inheritance." The audacity was breathtaking, but not surprising. "You haven't even taken possession of the deed yet," I pointed out. "Facts don't seem relevant to their narrative," Sarah replied dryly. "Richard is showing people some document on his phone, claiming it proves Nathan has legal rights to the property through verbal contract or something equally absurd." "Stay in your office," I instructed. "I'm calling Marcus and we'll be there within the hour. Don't engage with them directly. That's exactly what they want." After hanging up, I immediately contacted Marcus at his law firm. He listened to the situation with the focused attention that had made him such a formidable attorney, then spoke with characteristic precision. "This crosses several legal boundaries. I'll have Carson from our security team meet us there. In the meantime, I'll call ahead to your building's management and authorize removal of unauthorized visitors creating a disturbance." By the time we arrived at Westbrook Heritage Foundation, where Sarah served as preservation director, the situation had escalated. A small crowd had gathered in the lobby, drawn by the spectacle of Nathan's family's increasingly theatrical performance. Diane was now seated beside her mother-in-law in the center of the space, apparently giving impromptu interviews to bewildered employees about her son's heartbreak and Sarah's manipulation. Richard paced nearby, his voice carrying as he proclaimed to anyone within earshot, "All we wanted was to share in the family property that was promised to our son. Is that so unreasonable? After everything we've done for her?" The revisionist history was staggering. Marcus and I approached the security desk, where a harried-looking officer was radioing for backup. "Ah, the puppet masters arrive," Richard announced upon spotting us, shifting his attention immediately. "Here to continue manipulating your daughter into betraying her commitments?" Marcus remained impassively professional. "Mr. Preston, you and your family are creating an unauthorized disturbance in a private business establishment. You've been asked to leave by building management. I suggest you comply before this becomes a legal matter." "Legal matter?" Diane scoffed, rising from her seat. "We'll show you legal matters. Nathan has rights to that property that you're trying to steal back now that Sarah has cold feet about the wedding." I stepped forward, keeping my voice deliberately calm. "Mrs. Preston, no property has been transferred to anyone yet. The lake house remains in our name. Your son has no legal claim whatsoever to assets he was never given." "He was promised," Richard insisted, his face flushing with indignation. "Verbal contracts are binding in this state. We have witnesses." "You have nothing," Marcus stated, flatly, "except a profound misunderstanding of both property law and basic social boundaries. Now, you can leave voluntarily, or you can be escorted out by security. Your choice." Carson, the head of security from Marcus's firm, had positioned himself strategically near the exits, his imposing presence adding weight to my husband's words. 2 additional building security officers approached from the opposite direction, creating a professional but unmistakable containment. Richard's posture shifted, aggression giving way to calculation as he assessed the changing dynamics. "This isn't over," he warned, lowering his voice. "Nathan deserves compensation for the time he invested in this relationship. 2 years of his life, planning a future around promises that are now being withdrawn." The mercenary framing of their son's supposedly loving relationship revealed volumes about the family's priorities. Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened and Sarah emerged, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the chaotic scene in the lobby. "Sarah," Diane called out, immediately adopting a wounded expression. "How could you do this? To us? After we welcomed you into our family, after Nathan committed everything to your future together." Sarah approached calmly, stopping at a measured distance from the group. "Diane, Richard, this public spectacle accomplishes nothing. Whatever grievances you believe you have cannot be resolved by disrupting my workplace. We wouldn't have to resort to this if you'd answer Nathan's calls," Richard countered. "You owe him an explanation at the very least." "I provided a clear explanation when I ended our engagement," Sarah replied evenly. "Nathan understood my reasons, even if he disagreed with my decision. This manufactured crisis is inappropriate and, frankly, confirms that I made the right choice." Nathan's grandmother, who had remained relatively quiet during the confrontation, suddenly spoke up from her wheelchair. "In my day, young women didn't break engagements over trivial disagreements. They understood compromise and family duty." Sarah's expression softened slightly as she addressed the elderly woman. "With respect, Mrs. Preston, expecting me to house 6 people I barely know without consultation isn't a trivial disagreement or a reasonable compromise. It's an untenable demand that revealed fundamental incompatibilities in how Nathan and I view partnership." "Incompatibilities?" Diane scoffed. "You mean your selfish inability to consider anyone's needs but your own? Nathan was trying to take care of his family. That's what good men do." "Good men," Sarah replied quietly, "don't make commitments on behalf of their partners without consultation. They don't volunteer other people's resources to solve their family's problems. And they certainly don't stand silent when their parents disrespect the woman they claim to love. The pointed accuracy of her assessment hung in the air. Several spectators nodded in agreement, their sympathies clearly shifting as they witnessed the family dynamics firsthand. Richard, sensing the changing mood, attempted a different approach. Look, we may have been overzealous in our excitement about the property, but Nathan genuinely loves you, Sarah. This situation can still be resolved if you're willing to have a rational conversation instead of making hasty decisions. There was nothing hasty about my decision, Sarah replied. It was based on a clear-eyed assessment of Nathan's priorities and our fundamental incompatibility. I recognized that I was being viewed primarily as access to resources rather than as an equal partner. Diane opened her mouth to protest, but Sarah continued with quiet authority. More importantly, this confrontation at my workplace crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. It demonstrates precisely the lack of boundaries and respect that concerned me about joining your family. As if on cue, the building's head of security approached with additional officers. I need to ask all visitors without business appointments to exit the premises immediately. We've received multiple complaints about disruption to the work environment. Richard glanced between the security personnel, Marcus, and the small crowd of onlookers, visibly calculating his options before reluctantly nodding to his family. Fine. We're leaving. But this isn't finished. As they gathered themselves to depart, Diane turned back to Sarah with a final barb. Nathan deserves better than someone who abandons him the moment his family needs help. He'll find someone with actual loyalty and commitment, someone who understands what family really means. Rather than responding defensively, Sarah simply nodded. I hope he does find someone whose values align more closely with his. That would be better for everyone involved. The measured response, devoid of anger or defensiveness, seemed to frustrate Diane more than any argument could have. The Preston family finally exited the building, Richard muttering vague threats about legal action as the doors closed behind them. In the aftermath of their departure, Sarah turned to face her colleagues who had witnessed the spectacle. I apologize for the disruption to your workday. This personal matter should never have been brought into our professional environment. The Foundation's executive director stepped forward. No apology necessary, Sarah. We're just concerned about you. Is there anything we can do to support you through this? Sarah's professional composure momentarily softened into genuine gratitude. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. I appreciate the support, but I believe the situation is under control. As the crowd dispersed and employees returned to their offices, Sarah joined Marcus and me near the security desk. Only when we were relatively private did she allow a brief glimpse of the emotional toll the confrontation had taken. I knew they might react poorly, she admitted, but I never expected this level of public theater. It was a power play, Marcus observed. When direct manipulation failed, they escalated to public pressure and embarrassment as leverage. Classic tactics when rational arguments aren't available. I placed my hand on Sarah's shoulder. Are you all right? She nodded, straightening her posture. Better than all right, actually. Seeing them operate this way in my professional environment only confirms what I glimpsed at the lake house. If this is how they handle disappointment, with public scenes, emotional manipulation, and vague legal threats, imagine how they would have responded to normal boundaries within a marriage. The wisdom in her observation struck me powerfully. What we had witnessed wasn't just an isolated tantrum from a disappointed family. It was a revealing demonstration of their standard operating procedures when faced with resistance to their demands. I should return to work, Sarah said, glancing toward the elevators. But before I do, thank you both for coming so quickly. Having you here helped me maintain perspective in a deliberately chaotic situation. Always, I assured her, though I have a feeling you would have handled this capably even without our presence. As Sarah returned to her office, Marcus and I exited the building, discussing next steps. The confrontation, unpleasant as it had served an important purpose, providing indisputable confirmation that Sarah's decision to end the engagement had been not just justified but necessary for her long-term well-being. "We should proceed with the property transfer sooner rather than later," Marcus suggested as we walked to our car. Given their demonstrated willingness to create public spectacles and make unfounded legal claims, having the deed officially in Sarah's name would provide additional protection. I nodded in agreement. "And perhaps we should consider a restraining order if this behavior continues. Today crossed several boundaries that concern me." "Already ahead of you," Marcus replied. "Carson is preparing documentation based on today's events. Witness statements from building security and video footage from the lobby cameras will provide substantial evidence if needed." As we drove away from the foundation building, I found myself reflecting on how quickly circumstances could reveal people's true characters. The Prestons had presented one face during the controlled environments of occasional dinners and holiday gatherings. But when they believed they were on the verge of accessing valuable resources, the masks had dropped, to reveal the calculating opportunism beneath. The document that had originally been intended as a wedding gift, the property deed with its carefully crafted protections, had instead become a catalyst for essential revelations about character and compatibility. Sometimes, I reflected, the most valuable protection we can offer our loved ones isn't shelter from difficult truths, but clarity about them before irreversible commitments are made. The week following the confrontation at Sarah's workplace unfolded with surprising developments. Nathan, apparently realizing that his family's aggressive approach had backfired spectacularly, attempted a different strategy. A lavish flower arrangement. Arrived at Sarah's apartment with a handwritten note expressing remorse for his family's behavior and requesting a private conversation to resolve matters amicably. Sarah photographed the note, forwarded it to Marcus, and donated the flowers to a nearby nursing home. 3 days later, a courier delivered an envelope containing a formal letter from someone identifying themselves as the Preston family's legal counsel. The document, filled with quasi-legal terminology and vague references to promissory estoppel and detrimental reliance, asserted that Nathan had actionable claims regarding the lake house property based on verbal assurances and demonstrated intent. Marcus reviewed the letter over breakfast, his expression shifting from professional assessment to barely concealed amusement. "This isn't from an actual attorney," he concluded, setting the document aside. "The letterhead belongs to a paralegal service in Westbrook, and the language is clearly cobbled together from legal websites. No licensed lawyer would send something this incoherent. So it's meant to intimidate rather than initiate actual legal proceedings," I observed. "Precisely. They're hoping Sarah will be frightened into negotiation by official-looking paperwork." He took a sip of coffee, contemplating the situation. "The question is whether we respond at all or simply proceed with our plans for the property transfer." That question was answered the following morning when Sarah called, her voice tense but controlled. "Nathan showed up at my apartment building last night. The doorman didn't let him up, but he refused to leave for nearly 2 hours, insisting he just needed 5 minutes to explain. When that didn't work, he started shouting that I was stealing his inheritance, loudly enough for neighbors to hear. My maternal protective instincts flared instantly. "Did you call the police?" "Building security handled it," Sarah replied. "But this morning I found a 10-page letter taped to my car detailing all the sacrifices his family had made in anticipation of receiving the lake house. Apparently, his parents have already given notice at their rental property, and his brother has declined a job opportunity in another state because they were counting on moving into the family compound." The calculated presumption was staggering. "They're escalating," I noted, concern growing. "This behavior pattern is becoming increasingly problematic." "I agree," Sarah said. "Which is why I'm wondering if we should consider more formal protections before this situation deteriorates further." By that afternoon, Marcus had mobilized the necessary resources at his law firm. Sarah came directly to his office after work, and together with his colleague specializing in family law, we outlined a comprehensive approach to address the mounting harassment. Based on the documented incidents, Jocelyn Barnes, the family law specialist, explained, we have grounds for both a cease and desist letter and a temporary restraining order. The building security footage from your workplace, witness statements from your apartment building staff, and the written materials left on your vehicle establish a clear pattern of escalating behavior. Sarah nodded, her expression resolute, despite the distress these events must have caused her. I never imagined needing legal protection from someone I once planned to marry. Unfortunately, Jocelyn replied gently, these situations often reveal aspects of character that remain hidden until boundaries are firmly established. When people become accustomed to getting their way through emotional manipulation, they sometimes escalate to more concerning behaviors when those tactics fail. Marcus spread several documents across the conference table. We've prepared 3 distinct legal instruments. First, a formal cease and desist letter addressing the harassment and clarifying that there is no legal basis for any claims regarding the property. Second, a temporary restraining order application citing the pattern of escalating confrontations. And third, he placed a final document before Sarah. The completed deed transfer placing the lake house solely in your name, with the protective provisions we previously discussed. Sarah reviewed each document carefully, asking thoughtful questions that reflected both her emotional investment in the situation and her determination to address it appropriately. After nearly an hour of discussion, she signed where indicated, authorizing the legal proceedings. What happens next? She asked, her posture reflecting both tension and relief. The cease and desist letter will be delivered tomorrow by a process server, Jocelyn explained. The restraining order application will be filed with the court immediately, likely resulting in a temporary order within 48 hours pending a formal hearing. And the property deed will be recorded with the county clerk's office by end of business. Today, establishing your clear legal ownership. As Jocelyn gathered the signed documents to initiate the various legal processes, I noticed a subtle shift in Sarah's demeanor, a straightening of her shoulders, a clarity in her gaze that suggested not just relief but profound recognition of her own agency in this difficult situation. You know, she said as we prepared to leave the office, a few months ago, I might have hesitated to take these steps. I would have worried about seeming harsh or unforgiving, about cutting off possibilities for reconciliation. And now? I asked. Now I understand that establishing clear boundaries isn't harsh. It's necessary. Protecting myself legally isn't an overreaction to disappointment. It's a rational response to demonstrated behaviors. She gathered her purse, a new resolution evident in her movements. The Nathan I thought I knew doesn't exist. He never did. The man who would stand silent while his family planned to commandeer my home, who would make promises regarding assets that weren't his to give, who would escalate to harassment when those plans were thwarted. That's who he actually is. And that person doesn't deserve access to my life, my property, or my future. The wisdom in her assessment struck me profoundly. So many people, particularly women, are socialized to view firm boundaries as somehow ungenerous or unkind, to prioritize others' feelings over their own safety and well-being. Watching Sarah reject that conditioning in favor of clear-eyed self-protection filled me with both pride and hope for her future. The following week brought the expected backlash. The Preston family, upon receiving the cease and desist letter and temporary restraining order, initially responded with a flurry of outraged messages to mutual friends, casting Sarah as unreasonable and vindictive. Several acquaintances forwarded these communications to Sarah, expressing concern about the narrative being spread. Rather than engaging in a public defense or counter-narrative, Sarah composed a single, dignified email that she sent only to those closest to her. Some of you have received communications regarding my ended engagement to Nathan Preston. While I have no desire to engage in public discussion of private matters, I want to assure those who care about me that my decisions have been made thoughtfully and with appropriate legal counsel. The property that has become central to certain claims was never promised to anyone outside my family, and the legal protections I've now established are in response to documented harassment following the end of our relationship. I'm grateful for your concern and support during this challenging time, and I look forward to focusing on more positive aspects of life moving forward. The measured tone and refusal to engage in detailed justification struck exactly the right note. Several friends responded with messages of support, and the attempted character assassination gradually lost momentum as Nathan's family discovered that their narrative gained little traction among those who knew Sarah well. 3 days after the temporary restraining order went into effect, Marcus received a communication from an actual attorney now representing the Prestons. The letter, significantly more professional than their previous attempt, acknowledged that their clients had perhaps overstepped appropriate boundaries in expressing their disappointment, and indicated they would comply with the legal directives, while requesting that the restraining order not be extended beyond its temporary period. They've realized they have no legal ground to stand on, Marcus observed as we discussed the letter over dinner, and they're concerned about the potential implications of a permanent restraining order on Nathan's professional reputation. Do you think they'll truly back down? I asked, still concerned about Sarah's well-being. I believe they will, he replied. People like the Prestons operate through the path of least resistance. When manipulation fails and legal consequences loom, they typically redirect their energy toward easier targets. They wanted access to a valuable property without financial investment. When that possibility evaporated, their primary motivation disappeared as well. His assessment proved largely accurate. Over the following weeks, the confrontations ceased. Nathan made one final attempt at contact, a lengthy email Sarah forwarded to her attorney without reading, before apparently accepting that his former fiancée had established boundaries that couldn't be breached without consequences. The property deed was officially recorded, transferring full ownership of the lake house to Sarah, with all the protective provisions intact. The restraining order hearing proceeded as scheduled, and based on the documented evidence, was extended for 6 months with provisions for renewal if necessary. Throughout this challenging period, I watched my daughter navigate complex emotions with remarkable grace and clarity. The pain of recognizing that her chosen partner had viewed her primarily as access to resources rather than an equal participant in shared decision-making was real. The disappointment in discovering that someone she had trusted implicitly would make commitments on her behalf without consultation was significant. Yet rather than allowing these realizations to diminish her, Sarah had used them as catalysts for growth and self-advocacy. One evening, approximately 2 months after the initial confrontation at the lake house, Sarah invited Marcus and me to join her there for dinner. It was her first time hosting us at the property since taking ownership, and the changes she had implemented were subtle but significant. The master bedroom had been transformed into a home office with an architect's drafting table positioned to capture the lake view. The furniture throughout had been rearranged to reflect her personal aesthetic, rather than adhering to the staging that had been in place during our initial visit. Small personal touches, framed architectural drawings, books that reflected her interests, photographs from her travels, had transformed the space from a showpiece into a genuine home. "I've been thinking about what this place represents," she said as we enjoyed after-dinner coffee on the deck overlooking the water. "When you first planned to give me this property, it was intended as a foundation for my next chapter, a place where I could build a life with someone I loved." I nodded, watching the sunset paint the lake in hues of gold and crimson. "That intention hasn't changed," Sarah continued thoughtfully. "This is still a foundation for my next chapter, just not the one I originally envisioned." She gestured toward the office visible through the windows. "I've started consulting on historical preservation projects independently. in addition to my foundation work. This space gives me the freedom to explore that path without financial pressure. You've transformed it into something uniquely yours, I observed. Sarah smiled, genuine contentment evident in her expression. That's what I've realized through all of this. The greatest gift wasn't the property itself, though I'm enormously grateful for it. The greatest gift was the opportunity to recognize what I truly need in partnership, what I deserve in relationship, and what I'm capable of claiming for myself when those standards aren't met. As darkness settled over the lake and the first stars appeared in the evening sky, I reflected on the unexpected journey this gift had facilitated. What had begun as a well-intentioned provision for my daughter's marital security had instead become the catalyst for her liberation from a relationship that would have systematically diminished her autonomy and well-being. The legal protections we had incorporated into the property transfer, intended initially as prudent safeguards against uncertain future circumstances, had proven essential in establishing clear boundaries when relationships deteriorated. The document that formalized Sarah's ownership had become not just a legal shield against improper claims, but a tangible symbol of her right to determine her own future without manipulation or coercion. Sometimes, I realized, the most valuable gifts we can offer those we love aren't material assets, but the tools and support that enable them to recognize their own worth and protect it with unwavering conviction. In Sarah's case, the lake house had provided not just shelter, but clarity, not just property, but perspective that would serve her far beyond the boundaries of this particular piece of land. 6 months after claiming full ownership of the lake house, Sarah had transformed both the property and her life in ways none of us could have anticipated. The legal battle with the Prestons had concluded decisively when their attorney, recognizing the futility of pursuing baseless claims, advised them to cease all contact. The temporary restraining order expired without incident, suggesting that Nathan and his family had finally accepted the immutability of Sarah's decision. The lake house itself had evolved from a point of contention into a sanctuary and creative workspace. Sarah had converted the large sunroom into a design studio where she now ran her growing historical preservation consultancy. What had begun as occasional freelance projects had blossomed into a legitimate business with 2 part-time employees and a portfolio of prestigious restoration projects throughout the region. On a crisp autumn morning, I arrived at the lake house, bearing freshly baked scones and architectural magazines I'd set aside for Sarah. Through the windows, I could see her engaged in a video conference, gesturing toward architectural renderings displayed on her second monitor. The confidence in her posture and the authority in her expression, visible even from a distance, reflected a professional coming into her full power. She waved me in, wrapping up her call as I arranged the breakfast items on the kitchen counter. "That was the Westbrook Historical Society," she explained as she joined me. "They've commissioned me to develop restoration guidelines for the entire harbor district. It's the largest preservation project I've undertaken independently." "That's remarkable," I replied, genuinely impressed by how quickly her professional reputation had grown. "They're lucky to have your expertise." Sarah poured coffee for us both, her movements unhurried and deliberate, a notable contrast to the frenetic energy that had characterized her during the final months of her relationship with Nathan. "It's strange how clearly I can see things now, looking back," she mused, settling across from me at the breakfast bar. "Do you know what Nathan said when I mentioned wanting to start my own consultancy someday?" I shook my head, curious about this glimpse into their private conversations. "He told me it was a cute dream, but that I should focus on more practical priorities once we were married." She stirred honey into her coffee, her expression contemplative rather than bitter. "At the time, I interpreted it as concern for our financial stability. Now I recognize it as the first of many attempts to diminish aspirations that didn't directly benefit his family's agenda." "And yet here you are," I observed, "not only pursuing that dream, but exceeding even your own expectations for it." Sarah smiled, a genuine expression of satisfaction. That's what I wanted to discuss with you today, actually. The business has grown to the point where I need to make some decisions about its future direction. I've been offered a partnership with Blackwell Restoration. They want to incorporate my historical expertise into their high-end renovation projects. That's a significant opportunity, I noted, familiar with Blackwell's reputation for exceptional craftsmanship and ethical business practices. It is, Sarah agreed. But accepting would mean restructuring how I use this space. The partnership would require more travel, more client meetings in the city. I'd still maintain the lake house as my primary residence, but the way I've configured, the workspace might need adjustment. I recognized what she was really saying, that she was making significant life decisions based solely on her own priorities, without considering how they might accommodate others' expectations or needs. 6 months earlier, such independence would have been unthinkable within the constraints of her relationship with Nathan. The property is yours to use however best serves your life, I reminded her. That was always the intention behind the gift. Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. I know, but I wanted to acknowledge how differently things have unfolded than we initially envisioned. When you planned to transfer the lake house to me, you imagined it as the foundation for my married life, a place where I'd potentially raise children, host family gatherings, build those traditional milestones. Plans change, I said simply. What matters is that the gift has served its deeper purpose, providing you with security and opportunity to build a life aligned with your authentic values. That's exactly it, Sarah replied, her voice growing animated. This property gave me something far more valuable than physical shelter. It gave me perspective, a clarifying lens that revealed incompatibilities I might otherwise have rationalized away until I was too entangled to easily extract myself. The wisdom in her observation struck me profoundly. How many people remain in fundamentally misaligned relationships because practical considerations, shared property, financial entanglements, social expectations, make separation seem more daunting than accommodation? The lake house had inadvertently provided Sarah with clarity before such complications could diminish her options or constrain her choices. I've been thinking about Nathan recently, she continued, surprising me with this admission. Not with regret or longing, but with a kind of detached curiosity about how I could have misread someone so fundamentally. The most skilled manipulators, I observed, present different faces in different contexts. With you, he emphasized qualities he knew you valued: apparent support for your career, respect for your independence, interest in your passions. With his family, he clearly demonstrated entirely different priorities. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. The warning signs were there from the beginning, though I didn't recognize them at the time. Remember how he always insisted we split restaurant checks precisely? Initially, I found it refreshingly equitable, evidence of his respect for my financial independence. But looking back, I realize it was actually about protecting his resources while gaining access to mine. She paused, sipping her coffee. During our entire relationship, he never once offered to handle an expense that primarily benefited me. My birthday dinner, Dutch treat, the weekend trip to see that historical renovation I was researching. I covered the hotel because he'd forgotten his credit card. Yet he expected me to contribute significantly to his brother's wedding gift, his mother's medical expenses, his father's business venture. The pattern she described reflected a fundamental inequality that had characterized their relationship. From the beginning, a one-way flow of support and resources that Nathan had apparently considered his due. The most revealing moment, Sarah continued, wasn't even the scene at the lake house when his family tried to claim bedrooms. It was the day after, when he called to negotiate a compromise. His proposed solution was that his parents would generously delay moving in for 3 months to give me time to adjust to the idea. As if my fundamental objection was about timing rather than the entire presumption. I remembered that call, which Sarah had placed on speakerphone so Marcus and I could hear the conversation. Nathan's tone had been condescending, his approach manipulative, alternating between appeals to familial obligation and subtle suggestions that Sarah was being unreasonable, selfish, and incapable of understanding how real families operate. "You know what I realized during that call?" Sarah asked, her eyes clear and focused. "That I was being asked to apologize for asserting basic boundaries. That maintaining my autonomy was being framed as a character flaw, rather than a fundamental right. That the expectation wasn't partnership but submission to collective demands I'd had no voice in establishing." The precision of her analysis reflected months of processing and perspective gaining, work she had clearly done to extract valuable lessons from a painful experience. "The irony," she added with a small smile, "is that Nathan's family likely views me as the villain in this story, the selfish woman who deprived them of housing they'd already mentally claimed. They'll never recognize that their presumption and entitlement revealed incompatibilities that would have eventually emerged, regardless." "Perhaps that's for the best," I suggested. "Their narrative protects their egos while keeping them firmly away from your life." Sarah laughed softly. "True enough. And speaking of moving forward." She reached for her tablet, pulling up architectural renderings I hadn't seen before. "I've been working with a designer on modifications to the lake house. Nothing structural, just reconfiguring spaces to better serve how I actually live and work." The plans she showed me transformed the formal dining room into an expanded conference area, converted one guest bedroom into a proper archive for historical documents, and reimagined the kitchen as a more functional space for someone who primarily cooked for herself rather than a large family. "These changes," she explained, scrolling through the detailed proposals, "represent my first significant decision to shape this property around my authentic needs rather than conventional expectations. No more preserving spaces for hypothetical futures or accommodating traditional notions of how a home should function." The confidence in her voice and the clarity in her vision reflected profound growth. Not just professional development, but personal evolution. The woman before me had emerged from a relationship that would have gradually diminished her into someone who recognized her worth and designed her life accordingly. "You're building something remarkable," I told her, referring not just to the property modifications, but to the life she was consciously creating. "I have a solid foundation," she replied with a meaningful smile, acknowledging the multiple dimensions of that statement. "Everything else flows from that security." As we finished our breakfast and Sarah prepared for her next client meeting, I found myself reflecting on how differently events had unfolded than we had initially anticipated. The lake house, intended as a wedding gift to provide material security, had instead facilitated something far more valuable: my daughter's recognition of her own worth and her right to partnership characterized by mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. Sarah walked me to my car, pausing to admire the vibrant autumn foliage reflecting in the lake's surface. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "most people would view a broken engagement as a failure, a setback requiring recovery before life can properly resume." "But that's not how you see it," I observed. "Not anymore," she confirmed. "I've come to recognize it as a profound success. The courage to change direction when it became clear the path I was on would lead somewhere I didn't actually want to go. That kind of course correction requires more strength than simply proceeding with plans once they've been set in motion." The wisdom in her perspective struck me deeply. How often do we continue down established paths, in relationships, careers, or life directions, simply because changing course feels too disruptive or disappointing? How frequently do we mistake persistence in error for admirable commitment? "The real gift you gave me," Sarah continued, her gaze still on the tranquil water, "wasn't this property, though I'm profoundly grateful for it. The real gift was creating circumstances that revealed essential truths before irreversible commitments were made." As I drove away from the lake house, I reflected on how our well-intentioned gift had evolved into something far more profound than we could have anticipated. The property that was meant to secure Sarah's marital future had instead become the catalyst for her liberation from a relationship fundamentally misaligned with her authentic needs and values. Sometimes, I realized, the most valuable outcome isn't what we initially envision, but what actually emerges when our hopes encounter reality. The document that formally transferred the lake house to Sarah's name had indeed changed everything, not by creating the traditional security we had imagined, but by revealing truths that allowed her to build something far more sustainable, a life designed around genuine self-knowledge, clear boundaries, and uncompromising recognition of her own worth. Spring arrived at the lake house with renewed energy, bringing vibrant greenery and the persistent birdsong that Sarah had come to cherish during her morning meditation routine on the deck. 1 year had passed since the property transfer that had inadvertently changed the trajectory of her life. The lake house had evolved from a contentious symbol of family discord into a thriving hub of creativity and professional growth. The partnership with Blackwell Restoration had exceeded all expectations. Sarah's historical preservation expertise complemented their technical restoration skills perfectly, creating a unique service offering that attracted prestigious clients throughout the region. What had begun as a tentative collaboration had developed into a profitable business relationship that respected Sarah's independence while providing the structural support of an established firm. On a particularly beautiful April morning, I arrived at the lake house for our monthly brunch, a tradition Sarah and I had established to maintain regular connection despite our increasingly busy schedules. The property looked particularly inviting, with newly planted flower beds adding color to the landscape and subtle exterior improvements enhancing its historic character. Sarah greeted me at the door, her expression brightened by something beyond the usual warmth of our reunions. "Perfect timing," she said, ushering me inside. "I've just received some news I was hoping to share with you in person." The interior of the lake house reflected continued evolution. What had once been a formal living room designed for traditional family gatherings had been transformed into a multifunctional space that served both as a comfortable personal retreat and an occasional meeting area for clients. Historical architectural drawings in museum-quality frames adorned walls that had previously displayed generic landscape paintings. Professional periodicals and reference books occupied bookshelves once reserved for decorative objects. The Westbrook Historical Commission just unanimously approved my proposal for the Harbor District revitalization, Sarah announced as she prepared coffee. Not just the architectural guidelines, but my full vision for integrating historical preservation with contemporary functionality. "That's remarkable," I replied, genuinely impressed. The Harbor District project represented a significant professional achievement, the kind of comprehensive preservation initiative that established reputations and created lasting community impact, especially considering the competing proposals from larger firms. Sarah nodded, a quiet pride evident in her expression. The commission chair specifically mentioned the perspective I brought as someone who understands both historical authenticity and practical adaptation. Apparently, my experience balancing preservation with functionality set my proposal apart. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The skills that had made Sarah's professional approach distinctive, her ability to honor historical integrity, while accommodating contemporary needs, her talent for distinguishing between essential character-defining features and elements that could be thoughtfully modified, had been developed through personal experience as much as formal education. "The Harbor project is just the beginning," she continued, placing a folder on the counter between us. "Blackwell and I have been discussing a more formal arrangement, an expanded partnership that would establish a dedicated historical division under my leadership." She opened the folder to reveal a detailed business plan, complete with organizational structure, financial projections, and expansion strategy. The thoughtfulness of the proposal reflected months of careful consideration and negotiation, a far cry from the impulsive decisions and unexamined assumptions that had characterized her relationship with Nathan. "This isn't just about professional advancement," Sarah explained as I reviewed the materials. "It's about creating something meaningful, a business model that values authentic preservation while acknowledging the necessity of practical adaptation, finding that balance between honoring history and serving present needs." The parallel to her personal journey was evident, though neither of us felt the need to explicitly acknowledge it. Sarah had indeed found that delicate balance, honoring her past experiences without being constrained by them, preserving essential aspects of her identity while adapting to new circumstances and opportunities. "There's something else," she added, a hint of nervous excitement coloring her tone. "Something unexpected that emerged from the Harbor District presentation." She pulled up an email on her tablet and passed it to me. The message was from Alexander Chen, founder of Meridian Design Group, an internationally recognized architectural firm known for innovative approaches to urban restoration projects. He was representing the Westbrook Waterfront Investors Association at the commission meeting, Sarah explained as I read. Apparently, he was impressed by my presentation and the depth of historical research supporting it. The email was direct and intriguing, a request to discuss potential collaboration on several historical redevelopment projects across the eastern seaboard. Chen specifically mentioned appreciating Sarah's refreshing integrity regarding authentic preservation balanced with practical adaptation, a philosophy that aligned with Meridian's approach to urban renewal. "This could be transformational," I observed, recognizing the significance of such recognition from a firm of Meridian's caliber. "It already has been," Sarah replied with quiet certainty. "Not because of the potential professional opportunities, though those are exciting, but because of what it represents. Validation that standing firmly in my values creates resonance with people who share those values, rather than limiting my options or making me difficult, as Nathan often suggested." The observation struck me with its wisdom. How often do we compromise our authentic perspectives, dilute our expertise, or soften our boundaries out of fear that standing firmly in our truth will somehow diminish our opportunities? Sarah had discovered precisely the opposite. That genuine commitment to her values and boundaries had attracted opportunities and connections specifically because of that authenticity, not despite it. "I've been thinking about how differently everything might have unfolded," she continued, gazing through the windows toward the tranquil lake. "If you hadn't incorporated those protective provisions in the property deed, if Nathan's family hadn't revealed their expectations quite so blatantly, if I had proceeded with the wedding before recognizing the fundamental incompatibilities in our relationship." "Those protective provisions were standard legal precautions," I pointed out, "not prescient anticipation of what would unfold." Sarah smiled, acknowledging this truth. "But they created a framework that empowered me to make difficult decisions when the situation demanded clarity. Without that security, I might have felt pressured to compromise in ways that would have progressively diminished both my autonomy and my self-respect." She rose to refill our coffee cups, her movements relaxed and purposeful. "The irony is that Nathan consistently characterized my desire for equitable partnership as rigid independence, or inability to compromise. He framed my professional ambitions as distractions from what should have been my priorities, namely, accommodating his family's needs and expectations. And yet, I observed, your supposed rigidity has created opportunities for genuine collaboration built on mutual respect rather than hierarchical control." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "The partnership with Blackwell works precisely because they value my perspective rather than seeking to subordinate it. The potential collaboration with Meridian interests me because Chen specifically mentioned appreciating my distinct approach, not despite it but because of it." As we enjoyed our brunch on the lakeside deck, Sarah shared more details about the Harbor District project and her vision for the Blackwell partnership. Her enthusiasm wasn't the breathless excitement of someone seeking external validation, but the grounded passion of a professional confident in her expertise and clear about her contribution. "I received a message from Evelyn last week," she mentioned, referring to a mutual friend who had been close to both Sarah and Nathan during their relationship. "She ran into Nathan at a charity event in the city." I raised an eyebrow, curious about this unexpected connection to the past, but careful not to overreact. "Oh?" Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful rather than troubled. "Apparently, he's engaged again, less than a year after our relationship ended. Her name is Melanie. She's the daughter of one of his father's business associates, and according to Evelyn, they've already purchased a home where his parents will be living with them." The swift timeline suggested Nathan had indeed found someone whose values aligned more directly with his family's expectations, someone prepared to accommodate the very dynamics Sarah had recognized as fundamentally incompatible with her needs and priorities. "Evelyn seemed concerned that the news might upset me," Sarah continued with a small smile. "She was quite relieved when I expressed genuine hope that the arrangement works well for everyone involved." "And does it?" I asked, curious about her authentic reaction to this development. "Absolutely," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I don't wish Nathan ill. I hope he's found someone who shares his priorities regarding family obligation and collective living. Someone for whom the arrangements he expects feel natural and appropriate rather than imposed or constraining." The maturity in her perspective reflected significant personal growth, the ability to recognize fundamental incompatibility without resentment or bitterness, to wish a former partner well while maintaining firm boundaries around her own life and choices. "The experience with Nathan taught me something essential," she reflected, her gaze drawn to a pair of loons gliding across the lake's surface. "Compromise in healthy relationships involves mutual accommodation within shared values, but no amount of compromise can bridge fundamental incompatibility in core needs and expectations." The wisdom in this distinction struck me profoundly. How many relationships founder precisely because participants fail to differentiate between negotiable preferences and non-negotiable needs, between stylistic differences that can be bridged through mutual accommodation and fundamental values that, when contradictory, create irreconcilable tension. "The lake house confrontation didn't create the incompatibility," Sarah continued thoughtfully. "It simply revealed what already existed beneath the surface of our relationship. The different expectations about property ownership, family boundaries, and decision-making authority were always there. They just hadn't been directly challenged until that moment." As we finished our brunch and Sarah prepared for an afternoon client meeting, I found myself reflecting on how profoundly circumstances can reveal character, both others and our own. The lake house transfer had created conditions that illuminated aspects of Nathan's priorities and values that might otherwise have remained obscured until Sarah was far more deeply entangled, legally and emotionally. "One more thing before you." "Go," Sarah said, retrieving an elegantly wrapped package from her office. "I wanted to give you this, a small token of appreciation for the gift that changed everything." Inside the package was a beautifully bound album. The opening page contained a photograph of the lake house as it had appeared on the day of the fateful confrontation, followed by chronological documentation of its transformation over the past year. Physical renovations that paralleled Sarah's personal and professional evolution. The final pages contained architectural renderings of the property's future development, thoughtful adaptations that would honor its historical character while enhancing its functionality as both personal, sanctuary, and professional headquarters. "The deed you signed transferred more than property," Sarah said softly as I examined the album. "It transferred possibility, the freedom to recognize incompatibility without feeling trapped by it, the opportunity to design a life aligned with authentic values rather than external expectations. the security to establish boundaries without fear of devastating consequences. As I drove away from the lake house that afternoon, I reflected on how our well-intentioned gift had evolved into something far more profound than we could have anticipated. The property that was meant to secure Sarah's future had indeed done exactly that. Not by providing the traditional marital foundation we had envisioned, but by creating conditions that revealed essential truths and empowered meaningful choices. The document that had formally transferred ownership had indeed made the Prestons pack and leave. But its more significant achievement was establishing a foundation from which Sarah could build a life characterized by authentic alignment between her deepest values and her daily choices, a transformation far more valuable than any material asset could possibly be. 18 months after the lake house transfer, I received an unexpected invitation from Sarah to attend a community forum at the Westbrook Harbor District. The revitalization project she had spearheaded was nearing its first major milestone, the completion of the historic Chandler Building restoration, which would serve as headquarters for the Harbor District's ongoing redevelopment. The email included a personal note. "Mom, I'd love for you to witness what grew from the seeds of self-advocacy planted during the lake house confrontation. This project represents more than professional achievement. It embodies principles of balance and integrity that might never have crystallized without that pivotal experience." On a bright September afternoon, I arrived at the harbor to find the area transformed from the neglected industrial zone it had been for decades into a vibrant, thoughtfully designed space that honored its maritime heritage while accommodating contemporary needs. The Chandler Building, once a crumbling 19th-century shipping office, now stood as an architectural jewel, its historic facade meticulously restored while its interior had been reimagined as a modern workspace. A sizable crowd had gathered for the forum, representing diverse community interests, business owners from the surrounding district, historical preservation advocates, city officials, and residents from neighboring areas. The energy was palpable, a sense of collective accomplishment and anticipation for the district's continued evolution. Sarah stood at the center of it all, conferring with Alexander Chen from Meridian Design Group and Rebecca Blackwell from her partnership firm. The confidence in her posture and the respect evident in her colleagues' attentiveness reflected her established position as a valued authority rather than a subordinate contributor. The forum began with formal presentations from various stakeholders highlighting different aspects of the harbor revitalization. When Sarah took the podium to discuss the architectural preservation principles guiding the project, her presentation struck a remarkable balance, technical enough to demonstrate expertise while accessible enough to engage the diverse audience. "The challenge in preservation," she explained, gesturing toward before and after images of the Chandler Building, "lies not in freezing buildings in time, but in identifying their essential character while allowing thoughtful adaptation. Our approach throughout the Harbor District has been guided by a fundamental question: what elements define the authentic identity of these structures, and what aspects can evolve to serve contemporary needs without compromising that identity?" The philosophy she articulated resonated deeply with the audience, evident in their engaged responses during the question and answer session that followed. Several longtime residents expressed appreciation for how the project honored the district's working heritage while creating viable economic opportunities for the community's future. What struck me most powerfully, however, was the parallel between Sarah's professional philosophy and her personal evolution. The principles she applied to architectural preservation, distinguishing between essential character and adaptable elements, honoring authentic identity while accommodating genuine needs, respecting historical foundations while creating space for future development, mirrored exactly the wisdom she had applied to her own life journey. After the formal proceedings concluded, the forum transitioned into a networking reception in the Chandler Building's newly restored atrium. As attendees mingled and explored the space, I observed Sarah moving confidently through the crowd, engaging with community members, addressing concerns from local business owners, and facilitating connections between various stakeholders. "Your daughter is quite remarkable," noted an elderly gentleman who had introduced himself as a retired maritime historian. "I've witnessed many preservation projects over the decades, but rarely have I seen someone navigate the competing interests with such balanced consideration. Neither rigidly traditionalist nor carelessly modernizing, a rare equilibrium indeed." "She came by that wisdom through personal experience as much as professional training," I replied, watching as Sarah guided a group of city council members through the architectural details of the restoration. When she finally made her way to my side, Sarah's expression reflected genuine satisfaction rather than mere professional accomplishment. "What do you think?" she asked, gesturing toward the transformed space around us. "It's extraordinary," I replied honestly. "Not just the physical restoration, but the community engagement you've fostered. Everyone here seems to feel genuine ownership in the project's success." Sarah nodded, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "That's been intentional from the beginning, ensuring all stakeholders have authentic voice in the process, rather than having decisions imposed without their input. When people participate meaningfully in creating something, they invest in its success rather than resenting its development." The wisdom in her approach struck me as profoundly significant, in both her professional methodology and her personal boundaries. Sarah had developed a philosophy that valued genuine participation over imposed decisions, authentic consent over reluctant compliance, and meaningful collaboration over hierarchical control. As we explored the building together, Sarah pointed out specific features that reflected this balanced approach: historical elements that had been meticulously preserved alongside thoughtful adaptations that enhanced functionality without compromising character. Each decision reflected careful consideration of both heritage and purpose, tradition and practicality. "Alexander Chen from Meridian has been an extraordinary partner in this process," Sarah mentioned as we examined the original wooden beams that had been carefully integrated into the modern interior design. "His firm is known for innovative approaches, yet he values historical authenticity rather than viewing it as an obstacle to overcome." The contrast with Nathan's approach to the lake house, viewing Sarah's attachment to its original features as unnecessary sentimentality to be dismissed, rather than valid perspective to be incorporated, was striking though unspoken. "Our collaboration has expanded significantly," she continued. "Meridian has invited me to consult on 3 major restoration projects along the eastern seaboard, and we're discussing establishing a joint venture specifically focused on historic waterfront revitalization." "That's remarkable progress in such a short time," I observed. "It is," Sarah agreed. "Though what's most meaningful isn't the professional advancement itself, but the foundation on which it's built. These opportunities have emerged precisely because I maintained clear boundaries and authentic perspective, not despite those qualities as Nathan always suggested." We made our way to the building's rooftop terrace, which offered a panoramic view of the harbor district and the ongoing restoration efforts throughout the area. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the waterfront, illuminating both completed projects and areas still awaiting transformation. "Something unexpected has been happening as the harbor project progressed," Sarah said, leaning against the railing as she surveyed the district below. "People have started approaching me about their own experiences with boundaries and autonomy, not just in professional contexts, but in personal relationships." "In what way?" I asked, intrigued by this unforeseen dimension of her work. "It began with Rebecca Blackwell," Sarah explained. "After working closely together for several months, she shared that observing my clear boundaries and uncompromising standards had inspired her to reassess her own marriage, particularly her husband's tendency to make financial decisions without her full participation." Sarah's expression reflected thoughtful consideration of this ripple effect. Then a junior architect on our team mentioned that watching me stand firm on historical integrity, despite pressure from developers, gave her courage to establish boundaries with her overbearing parents. Most recently, one of the harbor district business owners sought my advice about extricating herself from a partnership where her contributions were consistently undervalued. "You've become a model of self-advocacy beyond the preservation context," I observed. "Not intentionally," Sarah replied, "but there's something powerful about witnessing someone maintain boundaries without apology. Seeing that clarity doesn't require aggression, that self-respect doesn't demand selfishness, that maintaining standards doesn't necessitate rigidity." As twilight settled over the harbor, community members continued to explore the Chandler Building, their conversations creating a pleasant hum of engagement throughout the historic structure. Sarah was occasionally drawn away to address questions or provide additional information, returning to our conversation with the easy confidence of someone fully in her element. "I received an interesting email last week," she mentioned during one such interlude. "From Melanie Preston, Nathan's new wife. This unexpected connection to the past caught me by surprise." "What did she want?" "Guidance, apparently," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "She's struggling with the living arrangements that were established when they married. Nathan's parents have essentially taken over the main living areas of their home, while his brother and family have moved into the guest house without consultation." The irony was inescapable. The very scenario Sarah had recognized as fundamentally unworkable was now unfolding exactly as anticipated, with a different woman attempting to navigate its inherent complications. "How did you respond?" I asked, curious about Sarah's reaction to this confirmation of her earlier insights. "With compassion but clarity," she answered thoughtfully. "I acknowledged the difficult position she's in without suggesting it's one I could have accepted. I offered some general thoughts about the importance of establishing boundaries early in relationships, but made it clear I'm not in a position to advise on her specific circumstances." The maturity in this response reflected how completely Sarah had processed her experience with Nathan, able to acknowledge the validity of another woman's struggles without either gloating over her own escape or feeling responsible for solving problems she had wisely avoided. "The situation confirmed something important," Sarah added. "The incompatibility wasn't personal, wasn't about Nathan not loving me enough or me being too independent or inflexible. It was structural, rooted in fundamentally different expectations about autonomy, decision-making, and family boundaries. No amount of compromise or communication could have bridged that gap without one of us essentially surrendering core needs." This recognition that some incompatibilities exist at the level of fundamental values rather than negotiable preferences reflected profound wisdom. Rather than viewing her ended engagement as a relationship failure, Sarah had come to understand it as proper discernment, the courage to recognize irreconcilable differences before they created entanglements too complicated to unwind cleanly. As the community forum concluded and attendees gradually departed, Sarah and I remained on the rooftop terrace, watching as lights began to illuminate the harbor district. The historic structures, thoughtfully restored under her guidance, now glowed with renewed purpose, their essential character preserved while their functionality had been enhanced for contemporary needs. "I've been thinking about the concept of foundations lately," Sarah said, her gaze still on the harbor below. "In architecture, the strongest structures are built on foundations appropriate to both the building itself and the ground beneath it. No amount of beautiful design or quality materials can compensate for a foundation that's fundamentally misaligned with either the structure it supports or the terrain on which it rests." The metaphor's application to relationships was clear and profound. The lake house, intended as material foundation for Sarah's future, had instead revealed the misalignment between Nathan's expectations and her authentic needs, between his family's demands and her legitimate boundaries, between their collective assumptions and her individual autonomy. "The document that transferred the lake house to me," Sarah continued, "created more than legal ownership. It established conditions that revealed essential truths before irrevocable commitments were made. That clarity, that opportunity to see clearly and choose accordingly, has been the most valuable foundation imaginable." As we prepared to leave the Chandler building, Sarah paused to look back at the transformed space, a physical manifestation of her philosophy regarding preservation and adaptation, tradition and innovation, respecting history while creating space for future development. The successful harbor project represented not just professional achievement, but personal integration, the embodiment of wisdom gained through experience and applied with thoughtful intention. The ripple effects of her clear boundaries and unwavering standards had extended far beyond her individual circumstances, influencing colleagues, community members, and even the woman who had taken the place she might have occupied in Nathan's family. By standing firmly in her authentic values without apology or compromise, Sarah had demonstrated possibilities that inspired others to examine their own choices and boundaries. The Lake House document that had made the Prestons pack and leave had indeed changed everything, not by securing the future we had initially envisioned, but by creating conditions for Sarah to recognize her own worth and design a life aligned with her deepest values. That transformation, from accommodation driven by external expectations to authenticity guided by internal clarity, represented a foundation far more valuable than any material asset could possibly provide. 2 years. After the property transfer that had fundamentally altered the trajectory of Sarah's life, an invitation arrived at my door. Elegantly designed on heavy cardstock, it announced the official opening of the Westbrook Heritage Center, the culmination of the Harbor District revitalization project that had transformed not just physical structures, but the community's relationship with its historical identity. The invitation included a handwritten note from Sarah. "This center represents everything I've learned about honoring foundations while creating space for growth. I would be honored if you and Dad would attend as my special guests, the people whose insight and support made all of this possible." The significance of this milestone was not lost on me. What had begun as a consulting role on architectural preservation guidelines had evolved into Sarah's leadership of an entire community revitalization initiative. The Heritage Center would serve as both the anchor for the district's continued development and a testament to the philosophy of balanced preservation that had guided the entire project. On the evening of the opening gala, Marcus and I arrived at the harbor to find the district transformed beyond recognition from its former state of neglect. Thoughtfully restored historical buildings now housed thriving businesses. Public spaces incorporated maritime artifacts and educational displays that honored the area's working past. Modern additions had been designed with careful attention to scale and material compatibility, creating harmony rather than jarring contrast with the historic structures. The Heritage Center itself occupied the restored Harbor Master Building, once the administrative heart of the working waterfront, now reimagined as a community resource combining museum space, educational facilities, and a research center dedicated to regional maritime history. The building's exterior had been meticulously preserved, while its interior had been thoughtfully reconfigured to serve its new purpose without compromising its historical integrity. As we entered the grand hall where the opening reception was being held, I was struck by the diversity of attendees. City officials in formal attire mingled with longtime harbor workers in more casual dress. Preservationists engaged in animated conversation with business developers. Community advocates chatted with architectural historians. The atmosphere reflected the inclusive approach that had characterized the entire project under Sarah's guidance. "Eleanor, Marcus, I'm so pleased you could make it." Alexander Chen, founder of Meridian Design Group, approached us with genuine warmth. "Your daughter has accomplished something truly remarkable here. Few professionals at any stage of their career could have balanced the competing interests as skillfully as she has." "We're immensely proud," Marcus replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Though hardly surprised, Sarah has always demonstrated exceptional discernment about what's essential versus what's negotiable in all aspects of life. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "That's precisely what makes her approach so effective. She doesn't treat preservation as religious dogma or mere aesthetic preference, but as thoughtful stewardship of cultural identity. It's why Meridian has expanded our collaboration with her to projects along the entire eastern seaboard. As we continued our conversation, I noticed Sarah across the room, engaged in discussion with the mayor and several community leaders. Her professional demeanor conveyed both authority and accessibility, the confidence of someone who had found her authentic voice and purpose. The contrast with the woman who had once dimmed her aspirations to accommodate Nathan's family expectations could not have been more striking. When she finally made her way to us, Sarah embraced us both with genuine emotion. "I'm so glad you're here to see this," she said, gesturing to the space around us. "Everything about this project traces back to lessons learned during that pivotal moment at the lake house." "In what way?" I asked, curious about the connection she perceived between her personal journey and professional achievement. "The foundational philosophy guiding this entire project," she explained, leading us toward a display featuring the revitalization's core principles, emerged directly from my experience with Nathan and his family. The display featured an elegant manifesto titled "Balanced Preservation: Guiding Principles for Authentic Revitalization." As I read through the carefully articulated tenets, the parallel between Sarah's professional methodology and personal wisdom became strikingly clear. Preservation requires distinguishing between essential character-defining features that must be maintained and secondary elements that can evolve to accommodate contemporary needs. Authentic revitalization emerges from meaningful participation of all stakeholders, rather than unilateral decisions imposed without consultation. Sustainable development balances respect for historical foundations with pragmatic adaptation to present circumstances and future aspirations. Balanced preservation rejects false choices between rigid traditionalism and careless modernization, seeking instead thoughtful integration that honors both heritage and function. Each principle reflected wisdom gained through Sarah's personal journey, her recognition of the essential boundaries that couldn't be compromised despite pressure, her insistence on meaningful consultation rather than unilateral decisions affecting her life, her ability to honor her past while creating space for authentic growth, her rejection of false dichotomies between independence and connection. The lake house confrontation forced me to articulate values I had always held, but never fully examined, Sarah explained as we studied the display. When Nathan and his family attempted to claim resources that weren't theirs to take, when they made decisions affecting my life without consultation, when they framed my autonomy as selfishness requiring correction, they inadvertently clarified principles that now guide both my personal boundaries and professional methodology. The wisdom in this integration struck me profoundly. Rather than compartmentalizing her painful experience or dismissing it as irrelevant to her professional development, Sarah had extracted valuable insights that now informed her approach to community revitalization. The very qualities Nathan had characterized as problematic, her insistence on consultation, her clarity about boundaries, her unwillingness to sacrifice essential needs for others' convenience, had become foundational strengths in her professional success. As the evening progressed, Sarah was called to the podium to deliver remarks about the Heritage Center's significance for the community. Standing before the assembled guests, she spoke with both professional authority and personal conviction. "Revitalization isn't about erasing history to accommodate current trends," she explained, her voice carrying clearly through the restored hall. "Nor is it about freezing structures in time regardless of contemporary needs. True preservation finds balance, honoring authentic character while creating space for continued relevance and purpose." The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, clearly recognizing the wisdom in this balanced approach. Several longtime community members nodded in particularly emphatic agreement, appreciating how the project had respected their historical connection to the harbor while creating economic opportunities for future generations. "This center," Sarah continued, gesturing to the thoughtfully restored space around them, represents our collective commitment to that balance. It will serve as both guardian of our maritime heritage and catalyst for continued community development, preserving essential foundations while fostering growth and adaptation. Following her remarks, Sarah led special guests on a private tour of the Heritage Center's research facilities and exhibition spaces. As we moved through carefully designed galleries featuring artifacts from the harbor's working past, I noticed how each space reflected her philosophy of balanced preservation. Historical elements had been meticulously maintained while modern amenities had been thoughtfully integrated to enhance visitor experience. In the central rotunda, a striking installation captured the district's transformation. Before and after photographs paired with architectural renderings and community testimonials. The visual narrative powerfully illustrated not just physical restoration, but revitalized community engagement with the district's historical identity. The most meaningful aspect of this project, Sarah confided as we examined the display, hasn't been the architectural challenges or even the professional recognition. It's been witnessing how preserved physical spaces create foundation for community renewal, how honoring authentic heritage provides context for meaningful growth rather than constraining it. Her observation reflected profound understanding of how foundations, whether architectural or emotional, community-based or personal, function most effectively when they provide secure grounding while creating space for authentic development. This wisdom, gained through her experience with Nathan and his family, now informed not just her professional methodology, but the community's relationship with its historical identity. As the evening concluded and guests gradually departed, Sarah invited us to join her on the Heritage Center's rooftop terrace, which offered a panoramic view of the illuminated harbor district. The thoughtfully restored buildings glowed with renewed purpose, their historical character preserved while their functionality had been enhanced for contemporary needs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.